In the class. Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Women in Manufacturing podcast. My name is Fran Brunelle. I'm your host for today's show, and I'm also the president of Accelerated Manufacturing Brokers, Inc., a company that specializes in mergers and acquisitions strictly within the manufacturing sectors. Today, we welcome to the show Emily Feenstra. Emily is the Managing Director of Government Relations and Infrastructure Initiatives at the American Society of Civil Engineers. In that role, she leads the division responsible for government affairs, media relations, and infrastructure policy for the Society, including ASCE's Infrastructure Report Card, which we'll learn more about today, and the Failure to Act Economic Study Series. Emily also serves on the Board of Advisors for the Eno Center for Transportation and the Innovative Infrastructure Initiative. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me this morning.
Well, we're glad to have you. If you can, please introduce our listeners to ASCE and what you do there.
Sure, absolutely. So the American Society of Civil Engineers is actually the nation's oldest engineering society. We're an association representing 150,000 civil engineers across the country and internationally as well. So my team and I are the voice of the civil engineers in Washington, D.C. We have an office near Capitol Hill. We have been sounding the alarm on the need to invest in infrastructure and maintain and modernize infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I mean everything from roads and bridges and transit to water systems, the electric grid, dams, levees, ports, even schools and parks. It's really broad definition of physical infrastructure. And you know, this is great timing for this conversation. We've just seen the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, a historic investment in a lot of those assets. So we are busy kind of being the voice, telling stories about infrastructure and translating really technical information from our members across the country to Capitol Hill and policymakers.
Yeah. So the infrastructure report card, first of all, I love the website, folks. It's infrastructurereportcard.org. It's incredibly informative, and I would encourage everyone to visit it. Several years ago, I became familiar with this because we were actually selling a pump and valve manufacturer. And during the time that we were marketing that company, I stumbled across this site in doing research, and I was absolutely amazed by how much of our nation's infrastructure is literally crumbling, right? And so the particular company that we were selling, they were repairing, pumps and valves that were part of water infrastructure. And in some cases, an entire town or county was threatened with no water. And they were pulling out these pumps that were from the early 1900s. And the original manufacturer wasn't even in business anymore. And this company was recreating, reverse engineering and recreating a solution. And I tell you what, it was really an education on the absolute need for infrastructure repair in the United States. Tell us a little bit about this report, how often it happens, and what you report on.
Sure, and that's such a great story and a perfect example of kind of why we do the report card. So ASCE started doing these report cards in 1998. And it was actually the 10-year anniversary of a congressionally mandated report on the state of the nation's public works. So we saw that nobody else was picking up that report and updating it. So we decided to do that ourselves. But, some of the issue is these are things that are out of sight, out of people. You're not looking underground at those old antiquated pipes. you're driving over a bridge, but you're not examining the underside and kind of the corrosion and these, most often just this gradual deterioration over time. And, engineers are innovative, they're problem solvers, they're doing the best that they can with the limited public funding. But if you talk to transit agencies or water utility directors, we've really kind of taken a generation off from investing in these assets that were put in the Civil War, in the Eisenhower era. We do have wooden water pipes in northeastern US from the Civil War. They're still in place today. But, a lot of our wooden bridge system built out a long time ago. So we started the report card to shine a light on some of these issues that we felt like were hidden. We're not getting the national attention that they deserved, back 20 years ago. We've been doing those report cards every 4 years since that time. They've gotten more robust. We're up to 17 categories of infrastructure, and we actually even included, we called it a spotlight on broadband. So we weren't ready to give it a grade, but we wanted to introduce some of the issues with broadband. So we're constantly adding and tweaking and making the methodology robust to give people an honest broker objective assessment of infrastructure conditions in this country and funding needs. It is very high level. It's not an engineering report. You go to the website that Fran mentioned. It is really about, taking very complex information and distilling it down into 3 pages or so, showing maps, showing charts for a policy audience.
Yeah. And just from an educational perspective, to let the general public become aware of what is needed in these categories and how bad the grading is. Interesting that I love that you have over time added to the report, where it today includes things that it did not originally include. Besides broadband, what are some of the categories that you've added?
For another great question. So our new category in 2021, and I should say the grade was a C-, which was good news in the sense we've never gotten out of the D's in the 20 years for our overall GPA, but bad news in the sense I'm a parent, would you be happy if your kid brought home a C-? No, there's a lot of work to do. But in 2021, we added stormwater as a category. And you can really see, even just in the news, cities that are inundated with flooding over and over again, as we have more impervious pavement, just stormwater issues are becoming kind of front and center. So we added that category. Let's see, in 2013, we added ports. And actually the Association of Port Authorities came to us and said, we see the attention you're getting on this report card. Can you please add us?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So we worked with kind of stakeholders, because really, we would love to add even more. One of the issues, in addition to kind of staff time and resources, is what data is available to assess the category. So we make a really hard decision on, do we have enough data, publicly available information, to be able to honestly assess the category. So in some cases like ports and stormwater, there may not be a federal agency collecting all of that information, or what they have is a limited picture. So we work with industry and stakeholders to fill out that picture.
Sure. Now, also, you're involved with the failure to act economic studies. Speak into that a little bit if you can.
Sure. A number of years we've been issuing report cards. The grades were in the D's, and we got a lot of questions from the public or Capitol Hill saying, so what that we have a D+ for a nation's infrastructure? What does that mean for the economy? Tell us, why should we care beyond the fact that it's a poor grade? So we worked with an economist to put together these economic studies on what are the implications for our nation's economic growth if we do continue with the status quo and infrastructure across all these categories. Mm-hmm. Very fine point on things that we all probably kind of get intuitively. So when you have a water main break that shuts down a business, that's not just inconvenient, that costs money for that business. When you have a blackout or a brownout in the electric grid, and unfortunately we've seen a number of examples, stark examples of that costs money. So looking at the economic analysis, we're finding that across these infrastructure sectors, we're not saying doing nothing, but just continuing to do what we're doing in terms of investment levels. We find that it costs the average American household and business $3,300 a year. Just
Wow.
deteriorating, unreliable infrastructure. And then when you look at manufacturing in particular, the costs are much higher and they grow exponentially over time if we don't solve the problem, particularly in the water sector. You know,
Yeah.
as you all know best, there's so many businesses and manufacturers that depend on water as part of their process. So when it's not available, we pay the price.
Yeah. So true. So true. Mm. So you've had a very interesting career path where you started out in communications, and talk to us about that a little bit and how your career has morphed over time.
Sure. Well, I found myself, I've been working on infrastructure issues for 15 to 20 years now, but you're right. I started out working in media and communications and for a firm, and then I got put on a project dealing with kind of walkable communities and urban planning, and I just really loved the issues and that what it meant to quality of life. And so I made kind of a pivot early on to go work as a consultant for the Washington State Department of Transportation, talking about one of their big mega projects in downtown Seattle and what we should do with this project. And coming from Washington, D.C., I'm a D.C. native. So I said, put me on your messiest political project, please. And they did. And I found—
That was brave.
I don't know, I'm a glutton for punishment, or I just really, appreciate that so many of these decisions that are made on infrastructure are really about how are you telling your story about, the project that you want to put forward. What is it going to do for people? Is it going to make their lives better? Is it going to make their commute shorter, them safer, and engineers, they are wonderful at designing bridges, but sometimes they don't know how to tell that story. So I kind of found this unique spot where I love to dig into the technical details, but I really find my skill set is in being a translator and telling stories about what my members do and what engineers do to create a better quality of life. So it's worked well for me. I really enjoy getting up to speed on all sorts of new issues, new projects. But it was an interesting path.
Yeah, that kind of ties into what we were talking about before with the failure to act studies that you were involved in, because that's about telling the story of why we need to do this, why we should, you said it best, why should people care about this? And it seems to me that you're an expert in telling the story. And that's fabulous. And that's something that I personally believe every manufacturer needs to listen to, because like you said, for the most part, they can be great engineers, great widget makers, but when it comes to telling the story of their business and why people should care and why people should want to do business with them, they oftentimes fall short. So the storytelling, the branding, is messaging that every manufacturer needs to pay attention to. And clearly you have learned to do that in spades.
I love working with our members and our engineers, and it's a fun, when you're making the widget, sometimes you're so immersed in it 24/7 that you forget what's most exciting or different about it. So a lot of what we do too is just listen, tell me about this innovative material. Mm-hmm. I'll hear something in there that's just counterintuitive. Maybe you hadn't thought about, and it seems very mundane to you, but to the public or a member of Congress, it might just be the most fascinating part of it. So yeah, it's constantly interesting.
Yeah. So, can you tell our audience a little bit for people that really are not aware of this bill that just passed? What's important about it? Tell us a little bit of what's in it and how it is going to benefit our nation.
Absolutely. So last Friday, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed the House. It had passed the Senate back in August, but it needed to get through the House to get to the president's desk. So that was a huge win and a huge victory over decades. But I guess first and foremost, this is a physical infrastructure bill. So it's 1.2 trillion, all dedicated to those categories that you see on the report card website. And those are really wide ranging. There is, I would say, the largest bucket of funds are for, your brick and mortar transportation projects. It's the largest investment in the nation's bridges in history, I believe. So a lot for bridge repair and resilience. And it's a combination of funds that go to state DOTs, but also new competitive grant programs for smaller communities or MPOs or different sort of levels of government. There's a lot of funding for water systems, 55 billion. That includes 15 billion set aside for lead pipe replacement, a huge need that we have. We want all communities to have access to clean drinking water. There's 65 billion for the electric grid. So making sure we can meet those renewable goals by making sure the transmission lines are available to connect the grid to those new remote sources of renewables. I mean, I could just go on and on through the list of categories, but really want to emphasize that this is a new scale of investment we haven't seen in our nation's physical infrastructure, and that so many categories beyond transportation are included, even things like Superfund sites and brownfield sites and cleaning up some of those contaminated sites. So it's 2,700 pages of legislation. We are still unpacking it for our members, especially I was talking to somebody at USDOT yesterday. He said they've got 21 new grant programs they're going to have to figure out how to administer. So just to get a sense of the opportunities there, I think, for manufacturers, the opportunities for the American communities that are going to benefit from getting some of these repairs that have been on the books for years. They just haven't had the funding to do them. So there's a lot to unpack, but very exciting, funding, but also new policy to make sure we're building back in a way that's going to make our communities resilient. We're not just putting back things the way they used to be.
Yeah. So as I listen to all of this, I hear opportunity for manufacturers nationally. Anyone that's working, you think about roads, bridges, there's metal, there's welding, there's, pavement, concrete, there's all of these different things. And the amount of money that's going to be spent to enhance our infrastructure, I would also offer for consideration that this is something that young people trying to decide a career, manufacturing is going to boom as a result of this. And young people should really consider going into some of these fields that are going to benefit as a result of this infrastructure bill. So Emily, we're starting to run out of time. I would like you to share with our audience if they want to learn more about the bill or more information about the ASCE, how best should they reach out?
Sure. Well, I would encourage you all first to take a look at that website that Fran mentioned, infrastructurereportcard.org, because you can find out all the information we have in our report card, but also we do keep it up to date with a blog post on what's happening in Washington, what's happening with the bill, all of those kind of newsy items. So that I would recommend. And also you can reach out to me and my team at govwash@asce.org, and would be happy to be in touch. So that's GOVWASH.
Fabulous. Well, we really so much appreciate spending time with us today. It was an absolute delight.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.
So listen, if you're a woman in manufacturing or in an industry that's servicing the manufacturing community and you would like to be on the show, please reach out to me at 908-387-1000 or reach out on LinkedIn, Fran Brunelle. Also, I want to encourage our listeners to visit whampodcast.com, where you can see all of our shows and also other shows brought to you by the Jacket Media Company. Thank you for being with us today and have a great week, everybody.